welcome to the Rides and Drives Team Radio podcast. As always, I'm Kaz. I'm here with Harvey. And today we are a month away from the 2026 NTT IndyCar season starting up again, a month there and abouts. How are you feeling, Harvey?
I am excited. It's really a great time. I mean, we had content days last week. We're seeing a lot of the liveries being unveiled now and some really cool looking cars. I love the new Sunoco car. I think,
Mhm.
Alex Palou's new car just dropped today or yesterday. That paint scheme, while familiar, still really pops. I like that car a lot. So lots of
Yeah,
fun
me
stuff
too.
happening. A lot of testing going on now. I think Mick Schumacher had a test today, so I'm waiting to go review the video of that. Lots of stuff for us to pay attention to, but that's not what we're talking about today, is it?
Yeah, we thought before we look forward to the oncoming season, we should take a step way, way, way back. Harvey and I recently had the pleasure of reading a new biography of AJ Foyt titled Survivor Champion Legend. And today we are so excited to have a guest on the podcast.
Yes, we do. Joining us today will be Art Garner, the author of the book, to tell a few of the stories and talk to us about the process reading the book. So, without further ado, let's bring Art in here to talk to us about one of the biggest legends
Legends
of
of
Indy,
Indy.
Indy, 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 Indy.
AJ Foyt. Art, welcome to the podcast.
First of all, Art, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself, about why this project was important for you to write and your background in motorsport?
I'd been a race fan since really I was a kid. My dad worked at Ford. I got involved with the Autolite division that was very much involved in racing back in the 60s. And he started taking me to races. For him, it was a job. I kind of fell in love with racing and have stayed interested ever since. Spent some time as a newspaper reporter and covered motorsports. Then went to work at Ford, then Toyota and Honda, and at different times worked in the motorsports area, or I was associated with the motorsports folks. And then when I retired, I always enjoyed writing. I was a journalism major, and I'd started writing a book that became Black Noon, which is about the 1964 Indy 500. And it's a race AJ won. So I interviewed him for that. And then afterwards, I decided I'd like to try a biography. I asked him, and about 5 years later, he said yes. So that's how it
Took
came
its time.
together. Yeah. At that point, I didn't want to do it. I knew it was going to be too much work. I said, no, I'd rather, thanks, but it's too late now. And then I went home and my wife goes, well, what AJ said. I said, well, he wanted me to write his biography. I told him no. And she goes, well, how do you tell AJ Foyt no? And she had a point. And so I went back to him and said, yeah, let's give it a go. And that's how it all got started.
Great. So
So
talk
just
about
a
the,
little context,
oh,
sorry, a little
go ahead.
context for those listening. When Harvey told me we'd be reading this biography, I expected, a 300 to 500 page single volume, nice interview based biography, pretty standard. It wasn't until the end of the introduction when I realized, because I bought the Kindle edition and you don't know what you're looking at on a Kindle. It wasn't until the
Mm-hmm.
end of the introduction I realized we're looking at 656 pages, and that's only half. So obviously you knew this would be a big project. When did you have the sense that you were writing something that was a little bit more of an epic than a standard biography? And how did that process work?
Well, early on, I had a couple of publishers interested in the book, uh, more mainstream, larger publishers, and they were interested in 100,000 words, kind of your standard book. And I was already saying, and this is just going to be one volume. I said, man, it's at least 300,000 words. And a couple of them immediately dropped out because selling big books is hard these days.
Right.
People don't read them. So I'm saying at least 300,000 words. It turned out to be twice that. Uh, very fortunate to get a publisher like Octane that was willing to do a book like that, or two books like that. But even midway through volume 1, at that point it was so just going to be one book. Um, and about midway through, I realized, man, we're talking at least you know 1,000 pages here.
Sure.
Uh, And they were going, whoa, that's a lot more than we planned on. I said, well, how about 2 volumes? And they thought about that and thought, oh, okay, yeah, that works. Because I asked them, said, here, you take a look at it. If there's places to cut tens of thousands of words, but I don't think there is, and they agreed with me. So that's the way it worked out for us.
For the record, I agree as well. I wouldn't have cut. I wouldn't have made significant cuts by any means.
There were thousands of words I could take, but not tens of thousands of
Yeah.
words. I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like, and tell the whole story. And that's what I wanted to do. If I was going to do it, I wanted to tell. I wanted to do a classic biography and tell the whole story.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I noticed going through the book is it obviously it's very comprehensive, but it's also gives a well-rounded picture of AJ, and some of the earlier biographies, and you alluded to this, the Bill Neely biography, where it felt more like a fan piece than an
Mhm.
actual biography, where this really gets into the nuances and, who AJ really was, and as a complex individual. So again, I just was blown away by that. When you started interviewing people, were you getting pushback at any point on stories you could tell or, some of the, say, more negative things that would come out?
Not really, and I made that clear right up front. We had to tell the whole story, uh, the good and the bad, because people know AJ is a controversial figure.
Yep.
If you don't tell that part of the story, there's not a story there. And so they were agreeable from the start. I told AJ, if I don't piss you off, I probably haven't done a very good job. But nothing seemed to bother him though. He was fine with it, and it really shows the whole picture of AJ Foyt too.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the questions I have for you is, as you dug into this book, what were the things that you found most surprising? I mean, obviously you've known him, done some research in the past, but as you dug into this, what were some of the more surprising things that you found out about his life?
I guess it was more of who he was, the personality that he was, and how diverse he was. He could be the nicest guy in the world one moment and a total jerk the next. And I guess I kind of knew that, but I didn't realize how often it was like that, one way and then the other way. So and then just how in the headline it says survivor, and I kept coming back to that when I was working on the book and trying to think of a headline, just how difficult it was during those days and how many drivers were killed during those days. Um, it's just incredible to think about it and how he survived through racing's most difficult time is amazing. Him and Mario Andretti both, and a few others. The way that they were able to survive is just amazing.
Yeah, I don't think people certainly now know both how often people raced back then and how many different types of races they did. Racing is such a specialized industry now almost,
Mm.
where, you're an IndyCar driver, you're a NASCAR driver, you're a sports car driver. That, to have someone like AJ who did all of those things at the highest level, that just doesn't happen anymore.
And that's some of the feedback I've gotten from some of the current drivers who've read it and say, they had no idea he drove all these different types of cars, 3, 4, 5 times a week sometimes. And they say they're envious that AJ was able to do that. And now it is so specialist, as you say.
Yeah, that's interesting. Which drivers, is there anyone specifically you talked
The
to
one that
about?
stands out is Santino Ferrucci. his current driver, and they have a really special relationship that I don't think he's had with a lot of the younger drivers that drove for him in the last 20 years, let's say. Ferrucci really has a lot of respect for him. And you know, he's actually done some other racing. He's done some NASCAR. He's done some sprint car racing. He was just at the Chili Bowl and has been doing that every year. So, you know, he's one that stands out that wishes he could do more, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah.
He had nothing but glowing things to say about AJ at our recent content days. So that's not surprising to hear
Hmm.
him kind of wanting to live up to that legend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Carol, Kaz, did you have some questions?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are, like I said, I'm somebody who knows AJ Foyt as a name before having I didn't pay attention to racing during the AJ years, and there are so many stories that stand out to me from your book as kind of defining moments in his career. But I'm curious what you think define. Are there any moments or stories that you heard that kind of define him as a person, the legend that he leaves behind?
Well, there's a story from volume two, actually,
Oh, preview.
that yeah, there's a driver named Ricky Knotts who was killed at Daytona. I think it's 1980 or 81, something like that. And it's just Ricky and his dad bring a car down to Daytona for the Daytona 500. He's killed, and his dad has no money left. They spent it all on this race car. And AJ says, well, and AJ comes up with the money to, to get the family home and for the funeral. And he says, don't tell anybody. And he's talking to Dick Hutchison then, who was a crew chief. Says, don't tell anybody. I don't want them to know it. Just tell them good luck and give them the money they need. And that's pretty typical. There are any number of stories of him doing good for others, but not wanting anybody to know about it. Which is the way he's got a huge heart, still has a huge heart, but then he could be so competitive and so demanding at the same time.
Yeah, I remember I can't remember which 500 it was, but at one point he came into the pits. The car wasn't running right, and I remember him jumping out of the cockpit of the car and banging on the rear trying to fix it himself when his crew couldn't do it.
Hmm.
That just struck me as who AJ was. He had to have a hand in everything, right?
That happened more than once, actually, where he's beating on his car. And there's some good stories, again, that actually in volume two, where talking to one of the crewmen who was the guy who was trying to get the part loose when AJ got out of the car. And he's saying, "Oh God, don't let him get it loose. He'll kill me if he's able to, fix it." And I couldn't do it. And actually, Tony Stewart, that's his first racing memory. And Tony does the forward for volume two and recounts that event for as part of the forward.
That's great.
Wonderful. Can't
Well,
wait to
and
read that.
yeah, and then so much of I think what your book does is tackle the mythology of AJ because it's again you alluded to in the book, stories get told and stories
Mhm.
get embellished and all that stuff. How did you go about uh, you know taking apart the myths and getting to the reality of all those situations?
Just researching.
Mhm.
But I was struck. One probably the biggest myth is the one where Pernille Jones saved his life in the crash at Riverside. And so I was studying, and I knew this. I knew the story, anyways. And I was reading all the coverage from the day, from back in 1965, I think it was. And none of the stories had anything to do with Pernille Jones. He had no involvement at all in these stories. And the reporter, I knew the reporter who had written a lot of stories for the LA Times, and he said, "Nah, apparently had nothing to do with it. He rode out there with me on my motorcycle, but he didn't have anything to do with it. He was standing there watching, and then Parnelli tells me the same thing. I didn't have anything to do with it. So that's and AJ was knocked out, so he wasn't
Sure.
telling those stories. Somebody was.
Right.
And AJ is a great storyteller. He's been doing it for 80 years now. He's been telling
Right.
stories about his racing. And the stories tend to get bigger and better all the time. So you just learn to check and make sure, especially from reporting from the day, that the stories are true.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the great thing. I mean, back in the day, there were racing journalists at all the local newspapers, things like that. The coverage was there. Now we rely on video for all of that, it seems
Yeah.
like. But having had those guys there, like you could call the LA Times reporter and say, "Hey, was this real?
Fact
Did
check
Hmm.
this.
it?" Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Which, a lot of people don't want to do because the myths are so much fun, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
Yeah, and one of AJ's friends told me, it's a God-given right. Embellishment is a God-given right of all Texans. And like I say, AJ tells a great story. Sometimes the races mesh together, and the facts aren't exactly the same. And I've heard him tell the same story differently to different groups of people, depending on who they are. And he doesn't need to embellish. The stories don't need to be embellished. He had incredible races and accomplishments, and his stories don't need to be embellished.
Was there anything that you were disappointed to learn wasn't true, or anything you were surprised to learn was?
No, I don't think so. I guess I was disappointed about the Riverside and Penelope Jones
Sure.
story. That's a great story.
Hmm.
Yep.
But but I'm happy to be able to clarify it.
Sure.
Um, you know, the, the story of that crash is a great story. How his throttle stuck, and he had a choice of hitting a couple other guys or diving off the road, and he drove off the road. It took a lot of courage to do that in a split second
Yeah.
decision. And that's just one of the incredible stories that goes into it all.
Yeah, when you talk about the survivor part of it, that's obviously one of those stories. In some of the sprint car stories, things like that, those tracks were notoriously deadly. Where were some of the other things that really, you know, uh, were the closest scrapes that AJ had?
Well, obviously, the one that almost ended his career at Elkhart Lake, and that'll be in volume two. It's an incredible story. I had a chance to talk to the doctors who were at the hospital, young doctors at the time, who went on to be at the top of the field in legs and orthopedics and feet. These guys were just pretty young doctors back then, but are now at the very top of the fields. And he was really lucky to end up where he did and have these guys treat him. And his recovery from that is just an incredible story. What he did to come back, the amount of work he put into it is just incredible. And a number of young drivers, or a number of drivers, refer to that as, they realize this is what needs to be done if you really love this sport. If you want to be a winner, you've got to go the extra yard. And a number of he trained with the Houston Oilers football team at the time, and I had a chance to talk to a couple of them, and they were blown away. This guy's 20 years older than them, and what he was doing to get back into the sport.
That's great. Yeah, that's interesting too because it talks about what it takes to go from being a race driver to being a winner, and I know that's a big part of um, how he differentiated himself, his mindset, his attitude. What were the things that made AJ that winner, do you think?
Oh, his dad, probably hands down. Right from the very start, his dad made it be known that winning is just about the only thing. No excuses. Um, there were no participation trophies back then, and so AJ's 5 years old, driving around in different little racetracks, and his dad is demanding nothing but the best. That's his focus, and his desire to please his dad was the driving force behind all of his racing. When he wins his fourth 500 in 1977, his dad says, pretty good job. AJ said, that's probably the nicest thing he ever said to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was one of those dads, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, which is not unusual back then either. I
No,
think back in the 50s and 60s, I know my dad was a, pretty demanding father. And I think most parents were, back in those days.
sure. Sure.
And I think too, that's a correlation you see with top athletes across all sports. People talk about
Mm-hmm.
their parents' influence on them all the time. And well, I'm very glad to have a father who didn't tell me winning was everything. Thanks, Dad. Maybe I might have won something if I had.
All right. So you're working, is the second book done now, or where are you
The,
on that?
the second book is to the publisher, but it's still in process. You go through edits and copy edits, and then back and forth a little bit, and
Yeah.
hopefully it'll be out the end of May. Hopefully,
Oh,
that's still the target. So. Um,
get it out in time for the 500 there, right?
Yeah, if it does, it'll be just by days.
Yeah.
It's the writer's a little late hitting his deadlines and wrote a little too many pages again. So it's his fault. But
Yeah.
hopefully it'll be out in time for the race.
Great. Great. Well, Art, I really want to thank you for joining us on the podcast here. It's been great to get to talk to you, to learn more about AJ, and to hopefully get some other people turned on to the book and the stories that you're sharing, because I think it's important that the legacy of the sport is, continues on as IndyCar continues to evolve, knowing these legends, understanding who they are, where they came from, and what today's drivers are trying to live up to. It was interesting. Santino talked about AJ a lot in his press conference this past week, and the relationship that they've been able to develop, and how much he is honored to be, the
Hmm.
senior driver on that team now. So I think as these guys get older, as we start to lose them, it's important to remember their legacy and their heritage. So thank you for doing this, and we
And
really
that was
appreciate
part
it.
that was part of the driving. What made me want to do it was that and Tony Stewart tells a story that of taking a young driver and introducing him to AJ Foyt, and the driver had no idea who he was.
Yeah.
And he said, "That dude's a race car driver," because AJ put on some pounds in that.
Yep.
And Tony says, he was the greatest driver ever. And it's sad that a lot of drivers don't know AJ anything other than what he is right now.
Right.
I remember that story from the book, and I was curious. Is the driver somebody we know today? The young driver?
I didn't even ask Tony who he was
Okay.
talking about.
I was
So
curious immediately.
yeah, so many things I think about after my interviews that I didn't ask.
Yeah.
Well, and I
We
wasn't
all do
even
that.
sure, like
Yeah,
imagine it's somebody who wouldn't want that information out there. I don't need you to
probably
divulge
not.
it, but
Yeah,
it's
Yeah.
a
But
little embarrassing in that field.
yeah.
exactly. If all you know about IndyCar is, the last 20 years, AJ as an owner,
Hmm.
Yep.
and not as a driver. And, you have to be, conscious about looking back and seeing what he did. And even, yeah, you hear the accomplishments, four-time Indy 500 winner, 24-hour Le Mans winner, Daytona 500 winner, multiple champion. All those things sound impressive, but until you realize the era in which those were done and the circumstances under
Hmm.
which that happened, I mean,
Mhm.
to me, that makes it even more impressive. The lack of safety equipment, the technology in the vehicles. They were driving on bias ply tires with drum brakes, and
Hmm.
just incredible the things that he could make a car do.
Yeah, and that's where the survivor part of it comes in.
Yeah.
If he didn't survive it, none of that would have happened.
Right.
And that's just incredible in itself.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Art, thank you so much for joining us. We'll hopefully have you back on when the second book is published. We get a
Okay.
chance to read through that. I'd love to talk to you again about that. And yeah, it's just been a great pleasure getting to meet you and hearing more about your book.
Well, thanks much, Harry. Thanks, Kaz. Appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you
Thank
later.
you. Guys,
Okay.
the book is AJ Foyt, Volume 1, Survivor, Champion, Legend. The author is Art Garner. Please pick it up. You will have the best time reading it. I couldn't put it down.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. What a great conversation to have with Art, and really enjoyed it. So we'll see you all next week for Rides and Drives Team Radio. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Harvey, and she's
Kaz, and drive safe, everybody.